Well, well, well. The inevitable, unavoidable Kurt Doolittle and me without coffee.
You don't have coffee?
It's cooking right now.
Okay. Well, we may have to. We're gonna have. What happens when you have to get up and get your coffee? I'll pause this so I can go get a fresh one.
Ah,
Because I mean, I'm not gonna let you be ahead of me in the coffee race. I'm at a disadvantage anyway.
I understand.
So, but I did clean my coffee cup for you.
Oh, you were way ahead.
It does happen.
That's it.
So
This is episode 2077 by my reckoning. Is that correct?
I have no idea because I'm at least behind by three or I haven't posted at least 3 episodes that I know
Oh
of.
my. I'm looking back here at my records.
Your numbers probably you probably don't have you probably did you account for
No, we were at 2079 last time.
right, so that's 280 is Thursday, so it's 2081.
All right. Very good. Now I've updated my notebook here. There you go. Welcome everybody. Do your thing. Hit that button there, and that button there. And don't forget to leave the glorious, voluptuous comments.
Well, in case anybody's new, I should probably make a intro video for this
Oh yeah.
series so that I've wanted to do that for a while, but I just don't care enough.
That's the problem is what is it? Yes.
And I just don't care enough. But to say that again, these are chats. This is where Brad and I cover. We usually do 2 sections where we chat a bit about current events, and then we do something that's directly related to the work, whatever stage we're in at the moment. And there's no real structure other than that. Really.
It's amorphous.
What this is all part of Brad's cunning plan to make me pressure me into getting the work done faster. So which has largely worked really, so I can't blame him. In any event, go ahead.
It's madness.
Yeah, anyway. But when you listen to this stuff, I always listen to what we say it's at 1 1/4 or 1 1/2 myself. It's partly because I don't know, when we're talking like this in relaxed form, I just speak slower than I do in real life. I don't know why. I just don't. I mean, and there's no prep, so there's no but I mean, other than Brad tends to make a list of questions that he wants to address, and I sometimes have a few. So I always say it's better to listen to this stuff than watch it. Right? Just put it on while you're doing something.
There you go.
And listen, because there's so much content in it, and one of the things we do is we repeat the same concepts from 25 different angles, and hopefully that it's that repetition from different angles that works. Now, there's really a couple of parts to the work, right, that you're going to pick up on, which is the beginning guys really want to understand the political world, right? What's wrong with the world, what's going on, etc. And so there's the part of it which is understanding the political universe that we sort of provide these psychological and social science for. But there's also the formal side, which is the logical side. And the advanced guys tend to work in the logical side. So I got one from, what's his name? Somebody, he changed his alias from LM to his real name recently. Thank you, by the way. I love it when people use their real names because then it's easy for me to remember. And then you have Steve Pender, who changes his fucking alias about 3 times a week. And I'm like, oh, there's this really smart guy that popped up. And well, no, it's just Steve again. Anyway, that getting to the work with the logics is quite hard. And getting to where you can write basically equations, and is what we do. It looks like language, but it's equations. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and this is only funny because the use of symbolics in mathematics, right, which is formal symbols in mathematics is a relatively modern invention. You should be able to express all mathematics in ordinary language, which is very difficult. And so, but we, for reasons you would easily come to understand over time, you can't produce symbolics in our work because everything's dependent on true context, right? So subjectively testable operations. So in that sense, there's this very technical side of the work. We tend to not really talk that much about it here, do we? We don't really. I'll science things.
Yes.
Right. I call it sciencing things, which is converting it to some sort of equation, right? It sounds like English, but it's an equation. And that equation is usually some intersection of supply and demand. Or equilibration is the real answer, some sort of equilibrating function. So what we're trying to do is show, is try to use this method that's quite technical that only some people get. And then on the other hand, there's all this other stuff, which is what you would call the historical, scientific, philosophical, which says, here's what's actually going on when we science things in politics. And then there's the output, which is the policies and things that we recommend change it and how we put the law together. So it's a really vast scope of work. And if you want to understand it, of course, you've got to sit here until we publish, and probably after we publish. It helps to just listen to these as background. Whenever I want to learn the edge of a discipline, in other words, it's easy to read a textbook, but that doesn't tell you the current state of a discipline. It only tells you the settled state or the semi-settled state of the discipline. So I'll just go read 5 textbooks, right? I mean, and I realize that just go read 5 textbooks. Well, I mean, it's like anything else. I mean, once you've mastered one discipline, it was hard, but the second one isn't. It's like making your first million is hard. After that, everyone's easier, right? It's the same thing with learning something. It's your first discipline that you master is somewhat difficult. The second one, you realize, oh, well, the only thing that's changed here is some words, right? Excuse me. What's changed here is some thoughts and words and approaches and context. But the time you get to your 5th or 6th discipline, it's just like, okay, the names have been changed to protect the uninnocent, right? And that's really all that's happening. There's a fundamental set of patterns to the universe. And so you begin to see those patterns that people, even within the discipline, don't see because they haven't studied 6 disciplines, right? And so you start to see that over and over again. So I just go read a bunch of textbooks. And then the thing I do is I just find every lecture I can listen to. And I was even doing this back, I don't know, in the 90s. I mean, back when it was like people record books on tape or their lectures and put them out. And I just had an MP3 player and I'd go run 2 to 5 miles. Me running 5 miles is an exercise in futile hurling. In other words, it's like sort of trying to run with your legs chained together but it does work. So I would go for a run and listen to these things, and eventually it sticks to your stubborn little head. So what we found with our followers is that the people who are willing to just use time and repetition, or in other words, they're willing to spend low focus, a lot of time at low focus tends to be better than people who try desperately to learn the thing quickly. Does that make sense?
I don't think it's easily learned rapidly.
I don't think so either. Because it's this collision of the way we look at different problems, and we show this method, which we're going to call ternary logic, right? I mean, continuous recursive information, disambiguation, and ternary logic. You start seeing this pattern, and all of a sudden it becomes an intuition. That's the same thing when you're studying programming or mathematics or economics. Is the problem is getting to the point where it's an intuition, right? Because the work is creating the intuition. Because otherwise you're just like, is it this? 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 Is this?
Right.
Well, which is I've said in the past to Brad, I literally do that. You know, if I've forgotten a certain thing, I just go through my list of what the criteria are, and I'm like, okay, now but after a while, it's just an intuition. So for newbies, that's the only advice I have is that this isn't meant to be classroom. This is meant to be a conversation. I mean, it's one step above two guys at a bar. I'm not even sure it's above it. It might be below it at some kind.
We don't have any alcohol.
Oh, yeah. And we have coffee instead of alcohol, and there's just fewer dick jokes.
Fewer.
Just all. It's fewer. So it's not. If you want to see my formal presentations, they're online, right? If you want to go through those, but that's not the point of this. The point of this is to cover current events and to on one hand, which is for the audience and the audience of people who are coming along. And then there's actually when I desperately need Brad's help in working through how to talk about something, which is what the great service he provides. That and saying, no, you can't say that. That sounds horrible.
That's when I did cover my eyes. It's just like, oh my.
So a lot of my joy comes from saying those things anyway, just to get a reaction out of Brad so he can tell me I can't do it. But I feel the catharsis by the expression, right? I mean,
It makes him feel alive.
It makes me feel good. It makes me feel better. Anyway, it's like I'm okay after I've expressed myself. I'm willing to say it nicely. But
That's
anyway,
right.
yeah, this is by way of loving Brad. If you can't tell, that's what I'm doing.
That's right.
I'm complimenting Brad for his work.
Thank you, Kurt.
Anyway, so I wanted to just cover that introduction.
It's time for coffee now.
You want to pause?
I can pause and let's get a coffee.
Okay.
Now you have your coffee, right, Kurt?
Yes, that was only a 45-second break or something like that. That was pretty quick.
I'm all loaded up.
So what were you just saying?
I was saying it's very useful to frame the recent events in the news within the framework of the science that we're working with.
Yes.
Because it will allow people to process the information in a manner that is coherent. So along these lines, I was interested that the British Prime Minister resigned after 45 days, which kind of shocked me a little bit. What was even more shocking was that she gets $129,000 a year pension for the rest of her life for that service.
You know, we tend to not appreciate the value of those little things. You know, it's the same thing with police officer pensions. You actually want to have them. Probably more, you care about judge and police pensions more than any other I mean, the rest of them, frankly, don't matter. Those two matter.
Yes.
Right, and that's because there's so the incentive to not do anything wrong is so high that it's basically impossible to overcome it. I mean, you have to give somebody like a $10 million bribe, which is of course visible. You can't. It's extremely difficult to hide those things. I mean, I know how to do it, but I mean, it's extremely difficult, and it takes time. Whereas a pension is like, Jesus, you know, a pension for a policeman or a soldier or a judge. I mean, it's like, why would you don't want to walk away from that stuff. It makes you, right. It's huge. So it's really an insurance policy. And so when I think about politicians getting their, pensions, I don't think about it for bureaucrats, but for certain politicians, probably prime ministers and presidents, I'm like, well, you're basically buying an insurance policy against the ability to be bribed. And
counter bribery.
Well, is that true? I don't like framing it that way, but it's true. Bribing you not to be bribed. I mean,
What's that?
well, you could say we're bribing you not to be bribed, but we could be. Yeah, I mean, it's true. I didn't. I thought she was a terrible choice.
Well, the thing that the article that I read was kind of interesting because it said this. It was like she realized that the government was under control of a deep state apparatus that was incorrigible, and therefore walked away. And is that how you interpreted that?
Of course. So the whole system exposed itself gloriously, right? And so my take is both sides of it. One is conservatives, and she's not a conservative by our standards, but by their standards, she's on the conservative side of things, right? Are elected by a population to solve point problems that are difficult. In other words, bring is like mommy calling daddy. When conservatives are brought in, you're brought in to get daddy because you can't nicely solve this problem. But
Right.
that's so the problem is conservatives think they've got a mission statement when they've actually got an assignment. Right. And so the public will elect conservatives on immigration, inflation, and economy, right? I mean, that's just right. But if that problem is solved, if there's no, in other words, no threat problems, they'll find nice people problems, right? They'll try to bring in nice people, like for benefit issues, right? But for threat problems, they'll bring in conservatives. So the problem for conservatives is they think they've got a mandate. No, they've got an assignment. And so whenever conservatives get in power, they act on a mandate instead of the assignment, and then they just get themselves forced out of office. Now, that's one side of it. So she should have been smarter if she wanted to get through this particular policy. But she did the one thing that the deep state can't tolerate.
What was that?
Is she didn't include the deep state and the financial sector in her dictate. And and what you did is you just threatened the money of everybody. You threatened a whole lot of people with a whole lot of money, because their risk went from well, there's enough going on right here that I can barely manage it, to, I mean, now the prime minister is a fucking idiot who wants to, make us privatize the state of the economy, and they just turned on her. Meanwhile, that's the state financial intersection. Then she runs up to the deep state, right? Because it's always difficult. Where are we talking about in the deep state?
Right.
Are we talking about the people that buy the deep state? Or are we talking about the self-interest of the deep state? It's like, okay, which group are you talking about? Right. And you got to understand that the British deep state problem is worse for them because it's more natural for them to have this an authoritarian bureaucracy.
Okay.
We don't put up with that shit, right? Well, right, if it gets expressed, we get all over it. They do it, but they know they can't let it be visible. But you see our people. But in the UK, it's visible that how.
Oh, it's obvious.
It's obvious. And it's obvious in the UK, and it's intentionally obvious in France. And it's not only intentionally obvious, but it's lauded in Russia and China. You understand that this spectrum? I understand.
That's just peculiar.
No, no. I'm trying to teach something profound. Actually, that's the trust spectrum. So it's the social
opposite of the trust spectrum.
Right. It follows. So the obviousness of the authoritarian or self-interest or not giving a shit about the people, the degree of that is dependent upon the degree of trust in the civilization.
expression of the authoritarian nature of the deep state function.
Yes, is in proportion to the degree of trust.
It's inversely proportional, right?
Right. And so, I mean, the problem here in America is they hide it. I mean, it's obvious that we've lost justice, FBI.
Oh my.
Right. We've lost justice, FBI. We probably never had the Treasury, although they're pretty good. We love justice, FBI. We've certainly lost every one of what we call the discretionary, like education and or welfare and tier. We've lost
Department
all those,
of.
right? So, those are called discretionary. Mandatory is like is benefits and then military. So it's discretionary, military, and non-discretionary, which is the Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And it's not true, but it's close enough to say they're about a third and a third and a third.
Right.
So anything that's the IRS is the fucking enemy of the people. I mean, enemy of good
That's
people.
why they don't sign their letters.
Right. The police have become the enemy of the good people, right? And that's because you can revenue when they need to raise revenue, they write tickets. But who do you write tickets off of? You write tickets of moms and minivans going 2 miles over the speed limit because it raises revenue. Or as you put it, you turn a crackhead back on the streets in 24 hours and you don't prosecute the guy who steals cars or the guy who until he's stolen 10 cars. That means he's been caught by 10 times. He's stolen 100 cars and been caught 10 times, right? And so all of this is transfer, all these costs are transferred to good people, which I call the leash law, which is you just punish good people who train their dogs, because it's too hard to punish people who don't. So you punish everybody. So anyway, I lost my train. I haven't had enough coffee.
Huh. There we go. Lift a glass. I'll backfill.
No, it was
talking about the obviousness of the expression of the
deep state
authority of the deep state.
And back to Liz Truss. So see, this is what I say. This is like when I listen to Chomsky, that fucking guy can go off and he never gets lost. Now I watch Peterson and he has less trouble than I do, but I have a lot of trouble.
You don't leave enough breadcrumbs.
Well,
you don't leave enough breadcrumbs, brother.
It's actually that I run too far. I run too far with every idea. Right? I mean, I go down a rat hole with every fucking thing, Anyway, that's when I say, let's say this guy's smarter than I am. I mean, I look at people and I'm like, well, I mean, I can do that. Right. I mean, I just don't want to. But then I get things I can't do. And that's the thing. When I just listen to Chomsky, I'm like, how the fuck does that guy do that for 40 goddamn minutes? And he can cite the people, right? I mean, his preservation of context, and his access to nouns, references within the context.
Yep.
I just think it's amazing. I mean, the guy's an asshole. I mean, he's a bad human being, but you can't go on. You can't not, that doesn't mean I can't listen to him and say, damn,
you can
what a beautiful brain.
You can be impressed. Yes.
I can be impressed by that brain. But anyway,
even though it comes to wrong conclusions.
Well, it's Pilpul, right? He's trying to he's creating a story to bring about the conclusion, right? I mean, that's what
he's crafty too, right?
He's good at it. Though I've switched to I've said Pilpul is part of storytelling. I said the actual technique is storytelling. Pilpul and critique are methods within storytelling because you've got to hold attention like that. Anyway, so back to Liz Truss. I mean the deep state. Well, the British deep state is it's not like the French, they like, if you, that's your goal, is to get your good people into the state.
Okay.
Right. And in the UK, good people can make it into the state, but they're infected by the same bullshit our people are, which is once you're in the state, your customers become other members of the state. And if you're in the State Department, which is the international part of the business,
Right.
anything international, then you're part of the international. The other international members of the states are your customers, your peers, your customers. Just like the CDC is a great example, and the universities. You go to the CDC so that you can rent seek a job while you do what you want. I mean, so that's what's happened there. They're not actually having the citizens aren't customers anymore. It's like the financial sector. Who's the customer of the financial sector? It's the state.
Yes.
Right. And so they're trying to keep the state, to keep them in a position where they privatize gains and socialize losses.
Right. It's the they seek the cover of the state and no interference from the state.
And no
So
interference by the people.
Yes, the
using
people
the common
acting
law.
using the state as a mechanism to prevent them from being parasitized.
Right. So it's the false promise that we have rights of appeal to the state, right? We don't have it anymore. And it's the false promise that the courts, because the courts, you used to be able to go to your manor, your nobility, your parliament, and your king, right? I mean, that's like for political stuff, right? But for the courts, you had the church court, the shire court, the court of equity, whatever. I always forget this one. The one that's in the cities.
Okay.
And the parliament and the king's court. You had this hierarchy to go to. And we had the courts of common law or whatever. But what happened is mostly during the Industrial Revolution, is that the state wanted tax revenue so badly that it allowed destruction of commons. They took away the public's right of standing in matters of the commons, and they gave it to the state. Well, that would be okay if we could appeal to the state instead of the court for crimes against the commons. We can't. I mean, they could claim we can vote it in, but there's no evidence that voting has any effect on that whatsoever. And we know that for reason. First,
I want to circle back a little bit to this obviousness of the expression. I'm sorry.
Well, I think I'm trying. It might not be obvious. I'm one of my journeys of providing too much context, explaining all the dimensions that are caused by the deep state problem.
Yes.
Which is that the deep state emerged because, for a simple reason, which we have corrected in our work, which is that we no longer can prosecute members of the state in defense of the commons. Does that make sense? We've been disintermediated from both the court of the common law and the court of basically aristocracy, the aristocratic court, the court of appeals. And that used to be how it was done, right? You had the court of the common law, which was for shit that we were doing, right? And then you had the court of the political court or the administrative court, which starts with the manor and works its way up to nobility. And that's really the private and the common, right? I mean, you have these two courts available to you. There's some crossing, but I mean, in general, because there always is some conflict. So we've been disintermediated. So we can't sue the financial sector, right? What happened during the interestingly enough, during the 60s was they couldn't get their Marxist propaganda in, right? So they brought about the class action lawsuit. And so the class action lawsuit is an attempt to restore some semblance of the ability to defend commons. Unfortunately, it doesn't explicitly doesn't give us standings in matters of the commons. In other words, we in order for something political to happen, the Congress has to create, basically have to do an impeachment or an investigation, or the treasurer or the Justice Department does. But there's basically no court. There's no way the public can intervene in matters of commons or matters of governance. They've disintermediated us entirely from it, which is why I say one of the reasons we need nobility back. I don't mean nobility like we used to have, but I mean the same values back. Anyway, so now that I've sort of painted that picture, which I brought to the conclusion of that there is a solution to this problem, we just have been intentionally deprived of our historical solution to fixing this problem. So now tie us back, and I'll try to.
So this relates to the obviousness of the expression of the authoritarian nature of the deep state function.
Yes.
Which was inversely related to the trust the public shares with those people that are operating the state apparatus. And it's like this. It appears to me that there has been an intentional division of the people to create an authoritarian deep state.
Well,
by separating them from the people and then treating them as a cut above.
Well, I mean,
that they didn't earn.
Right. And it's
so it's goes back to credentialism.
Well, it goes, let's go on a journey. It goes well, and at least in America, it goes back to Jefferson thinking that there was something to be learned from the French and being wrong. How do you like that?
Even the greatest actors have their errors.
We're all sinners, man. We just sin differently. So the problem is the Jefferson, we didn't need anything to exist that wasn't already in the English system. Needed nothing different. But Jefferson was all, he was a man of his time. He was an extremely intelligent, educated man. Adams was better, but we won't have to go there. I'm sort of friendly with one of his descendants, who is a real proper nerd, let me tell you. He's tall, good looking, but he's a proper nerd. Anyway, so Jefferson just got enamored of the fashion, and because France was the fashion. We forget that that France had a lot of wealth because it had the best land in Europe during the agrarian age. So since it had the best land, it could build the biggest population. With the biggest population and the worst fucking government in Europe, which is really remember, that's why we had the French Revolution, is because the most backward government in Europe, most authoritarian and backward government, which is why France is still the most authoritarian government in Europe. So feminine authoritarian too, which I like to rub that. Can I rub that in a little bit?
Just rude.
I just love shitting. Anyway, so
I see in the comments that the boys want to hear it.
And they love it because it's true.
Gratuitous digs at France.
Well, because it's true, and France has earned our enmity. If you're a conservative, you understand that France has attempted to be a problem for the Anglosphere for a long time, especially over the past 30, 40 years. So anyway, I got to stop digressing.
I'm sorry.
So where was I?
Backwards French.
So yeah, okay. So what happened is that he brought this French bullshit in there, into the design of the American Constitution, instead of just leaving it as, the British common law, whatever. The second thing is they didn't, like I've said, there are 8 holes in the Constitution. One of them being that the common that certain things are stated in the Declaration, but they aren't put in the Constitution directly. Or they're assumed, but they're not codified. And then the common law is assumed and uncodified, but it's not articulated. In other words, the common law isn't stated what those foundations are. So the Bill of Rights is simply a list of those things that were natural rights under the common law that they were most aware of in the moment, but they didn't have the origin cost of the origin logic of those rights. And so they left these holes in there, which is the problem.
But it's because it's implicit and not explicit.
It's implicit. So this allowed what the thing, like you just mentioned, the credentialism, right? But I'm going to horror show this a bit. So there's a horror show called Jeremy Bentham.
Okay.
Who is part of the Anglo era of look how big my dick is, we're the best. Anglo supremacy. I would say Anglo superiority, but Anglo supremacy is probably what happened there. And he tried to do a little bit what I'm doing, which is he set out on a mission to formalize the law. He failed, right? But what he did is the reason he failed is he's trying to create a positive law. And so who invented positive law?
Yes.
The French. Napoleon did, right? So the French have the most authoritarian government. They come up with all these high-minded utopian ideas that, of course, led to socialism and Marxism and all this other shit. And France being the witch's cauldron of bad fucking ideas that hurt mankind. And so I just love it. I mean, it's so true too. I love shitting on it. And so the visual just came up. The witch's cauldron of bad ideas. So anyway, so the French do their nonsense, and Jefferson brings it in. Bentham comes along. So they're trying to. So what's happened is the middle class now has taken power from the aristocracy, and the French have legitimized it with this bullshit they have. Right? English don't do that. It's just that these are our rights of Englishmen. There's nothing utopian about it. Really, there isn't. It's just this is the laws of nature and nature's God, which is what it says in the Declaration, right? Of nature and these are the laws bound by nature and nature's God. So the French don't. They make this very utopian nonsense. And so Bentham comes along. Then you have the Marxist Revolution. Right, and so you have the subsequent, and you have the American Revolution. The American Revolution provides justification for authoritarianism in the state, right? And so that's when you get the post that period. You start to get the American Empire as the Civil War has built enough military complex, and by the time as we head towards the turn of the century, while the economics maintains in its place in England. In other words, the financial sector is still in England. By the late 1800s, scholarship has moved to Germany, and entrepreneurship has moved to America.
Right.
See, it's important to understand these concepts, these background things that are happening are causing this weird behavior. As basically it's really the classical restoration starts in 1200, and it's like the Bronze Age explosion or the agrarian explosion. It just blows up, right? And so this, as soon as we get the printing press, it goes industrial, right? And so this intellectual explosion happens, and it's working its way across Europe. And so what happens is the British advantage, which is solely theirs, ends up being the Germans are the place of intellectual. I mean, German education was the best in the world, which really was about to lead to the Second Industrial Revolution. We hadn't had the world wars. And we don't really know what would have happened there, but it would have been better than what's happened likely. The Americans had taken over entrepreneurship and money making, and the Britons had held finance, and France was left behind.
Ah,
All right. So where am I now? So
set
then
it
we
up
get,
to the pre-World War I era.
right. So we've had the Civil War, we've had Bentham. Now what happens is we get the Jewish Revolution. Now we've had the French, the English, the American, the French, and the German cognitive revolution. So the Jews get their enfranchisement and they start participating. And then we have the Jewish intellectual revolution, which is Marx and Bose and Freud and all the other pseudoscientists, right? You know, Cantor's pairings. I mean, it's just so stupid. Anyway, you got Lewontin and then finally Gould, and you know, basically the whole spectrum of Jewish pseudoscientists. But among these Jewish pseudoscientists are Jewish legal theorists. Now, in Jewish theory, right, in English law, it's the law of man, nature, and nature's God, and we can only apply it within those limits. In French, they lay out this moral code that's including the positiva and negativa. So continental law says what you can do and what you can't do, while common law says
what you must do.
right, and common law only says what you can't do. So the field of opportunities for what you can do is high. This means that everything is backloaded. So there's very little regulatory function in that law. Now,
Right.
Jewish law is scholarly. So French law is basically a step between French and Jewish law. So Jewish thinkers get together and then make up a law that's supposed to produce a good. To make this sense, sir, it's important.
Yeah, it's like this is they have it's like storytelling,
It's storytelling.
consistency,
Right.
and
so
legalism based upon the storytelling that is consensual among the group of scholars.
right. So realistically,
So,
we're talking about empiricism, philosophy, and theology. So Anglo-empiricism, which is via negativa, French philosophy, which is technical, but it's morally ambitious and or utopian, and
so it has a via positiva.
right, and then Jewish, which is purely justificationary. And so out of this we get Res Kelsen. I'm going to get this wrong. Res Kelsen Dworkin. Who am I missing? Res Kelsen Dworkin. Ugh. Sorry, forgetting one. And then we get and that's the positive law and the positive law movement in America. So it's not that the positive law didn't have some origin in Bentham in England, right? It didn't have that there was excuse for some positive law right up through as America went through the Civil War and became federally strong, and then went through the driving Europe out of our hemisphere, which made it even more strong, which came into the world wars, which made it more strong, right? Which is because that's what happens when you build a military, right? Because
I think that was the intentionality of it.
well, see, this is you and I end up with this. So just like Martin and I see people as idiots seizing incentives, and some people see people with designs. You know, I guess it's two sides of the coin. I just look at it as, well, of course you do that,
Doesn't matter.
right? So what you have with the Jews did the same thing that the Germans did, right? Which the Germans came along with Kant and Hegel and all the phenomenalists trying to create a secular religion. But Jewish culture is legal. And so they tried to create a cult of the law, positive law. They tried to express Jewish thought in positive law, which is rule by priesthood or rule by intellectuals.
Right.
Where we have rule by rule
Wait,
among warriors.
okay. So this goes to, this goes to directly to credentialism.
Right. And so what happens is that in the post-war period, because science and technology, because of nuclear, because first of all, because we learned from the Germans how important technology was. That's the right answer. And that we imported all these Germans. My middle name, I'm named after Edwin Schneider, was a German rocket engineer working for Goddard, or the Goddard. So I mean, this is my family. It's in my fucking name. So these guys came over, and the drive for technocracy
Came over. They were shipped. They were taken. They were part of the booty of the post-war era.
Yeah, exactly. And so they brought over these German scientists, which of course destroyed the German academies, and they truncated what was the next stage of the scientific revolution, which we're still paying the cost for. You don't people. It's very hard to see this unless you have a lot of knowledge of the history of science and technology and economy and knowledge. But I mean, it was very clear that something was happening there, and we cut it. And with the world wars, we cut its head off.
That's right.
It came here, and it's not as good. And it's not as good for the reasons I've stated, because the same thing that happened in positive law happened with Einstein and Bohr in mathematics. That
So I want to talk about this positive law.
All right. So
it has three names. It has three names. It has via positiva law, positive law, and legal positivism.
Correct.
Just for the people watching and listening.
It means you can control society with law versus seek for commonality and concurrency among the people in order to make law. So the Anglo method, Germanic or Anglo method, is not it's bottom up. In other words, you can sell an idea, but the people have to agree on it, which is concurrency, which they don't understand. That's why we have the direct voting for the House, the state for the Senate, and the electoral college for the presidency, is to guarantee commonality. Give me concurrency. Not majority. It's not. We don't live in a majority. We live in a common via negativa law, and concurrent democracy, which means we have to agree. So we do the bottom up empirical, and they do the top down theoretical and authoritarian. We do the anti-authoritarian.
And so this top down thing is it's interesting because it goes to Newton and action at a distance. Yeah. Goes to the purpose of it is to create incentives to make everybody align the way you wish them to align from the top down.
Yeah, it's just Jewish supremacy. They think because they produce more intellectuals that they're right. Whereas there's truthfully nothing good in Judaism, except the natural selection by upbreeding through rabbis. In other words, everything that good happened in Judaism is a modern effect of centuries of selective reproduction for feminine traits, which is literacy, right? And then being let into the Aristotelian civilization of Europeans. But Jews produced nothing of value throughout their entire history, except Abrahamic method of deceit. And so there's no arts, no letters, no nothing. There's nothing. So there's no engineering. There's not a single value they produced, except that. So they have this idea of supremacy, but it's credentialed supremacy. It's not performative supremacy. Whereas Europeans, we do performative supremacy, not right. And this is what the difference between storytelling and demonstrated capacity.
It's competence, demonstrated competence,
versus
and it is like. But the interesting thing is this. I'll point at the Marxist, and this is this demonstration of competence generates inequalities.
Well, of course it does.
Well, but see, this generates hierarchy, which is what they deliberately create. They're attempting to undermine all the time.
Oh, they're just trying to create a different one. They're trying to create a positiva hierarchy, which is overconfident. In other words, the female mind. They're trying to create the female mind, overconfident mind that they can produce a universal good, mothering. And they justify it by the fact that by selective breeding, they've produced more outliers, even though those outliers were only added value once they were integrated into Western civilization. They added no value before that. They were detrimental to every people before that. That's why they were persecuted. So there's a reason for them to think they're right, and they're even though they're wrong, right? They have this legitimizing function because of their credentialism. And so the problem was post-war, with all the science and technology moving around, there was huge demand for technocrats. All right. And so there was a second causal action, which is because the Jewish method had been successful in producing the communists, right? The Jewish movement had produced the communists in the Soviet Union. There was the belief that because the Soviet Union was catching up so fast that they were doing it right. And so there were three factors driving this behavior: the conversion of the church to the academy, right? The church's role of academy, the belief in technocrats, both from study of German military technocracy in the government and the study of Soviet, and the rise of the need for technology and education as a competitive advantage over the Soviets. In other words, to win the Cold War. These three factors led to credentialism in the universities. Well, who does credentialism favor? Demonstrated competency or demonstrated capacity? In other words, I'm going to use capacity for credential ability versus so demonstrated capacity or demonstrated competency. Well, I mean, you can test for capacity, but you can only demonstrate competency. And so before the war, I mean, up until I think Eisenhower, it goes downhill with Kennedy, but up until Eisenhower, it's like 60% of the people are from military or industry in the senior places in government. Look at fucking Obama, or God forbid today's administration. It's like people from the Department of Dysfunctional Circus Production. I mean, there's just one crazy nutcase after another in there because they want to be inclusive, but there's no competency there. And so what competency we see is coming from the military, and they can't win. There's still, what's been happening is that my military is being undermined by the woke movement on one end, and it's being undermined by the deep state actors and the foreign actors that you continue to talk about. By defunding or no funding. What we need, of course, is that there's about 3 state. I can't remember how the military payroll works. It's a grid, right? And there's a hierarchy, and then there's within each stage of the hierarchy there's a escalation. We're about 3 levels. Last I looked at this, which was like 19 or 18, maybe even 17. It's about 3 levels too low for market demand. So we can't fill the military. So when the heritage comes out and they say we can't fight this coming 3-front war, which they did this week, and of course other people argue, I'm like, well, your measure ships and whatever, but I'm looking at how many people are there and what's the people problem we're having if training is actually our advantage, not our technology. And second, we don't have stores of arms. I mean, look, we're laughing at the Russians because we're making them burn down 70 years of accumulated stores of weapons. But you know how long it takes America to do that? Like 60
munitions,
days.
right? Yep.
And so, because our high-tech weapons are expensive, and so this war on our institutions converted us from a meritocratic demonstrated competency to a credentialed ideological incompetency.
I'm going to tie this back again.
And so that's the problem of credentialism. That when you're talking about credentialism, it's easy to say something like that. I hope I tied all these causes together,
Yes,
right?
you
So that you
did.
can see why we're here isn't like one conspiracy. It's like
No,
it's like common interests converging on producing a natural outcome of incentives that we failed to defend against,
we're
right?
in agreement.
Right. So we can defend against this by converting from credentialism back to demonstrated competency. And we can fix the institutions by eliminating woke and Marxism from them and restoring the drive for developing competency rather than credentials. And when we do that, of course, we'll have a very different structure. And one of the most important things is how do we restore the difference between a state? I mean, I touched on this yesterday when I was talking about this online. The difference between how do we restore statesmen, nobility, aristocracy, and statesmen instead of uh, politicians, um, elites, and credentialists. I hope I write that. I hope I remember to
Say
write
that again, please.
how do we transition from how do we restore statesmen, nobility, and aristocracy and given that we're in a state of politicians, I forgot what I said, and credentialists, politicians, elites, and credentialists. In other words, we're not in.
We're not in the West anymore.
Well, yeah, we're not, because this is all verbalism instead of action, when the West is all predicated on action. So you can tell the difference between Western speech and Western masculine speech and Jewish and feminine speech is they tell stories and we state facts. Well, what do women and men do? I mean, stories and facts. I mean, so it's not, it's we could the only difference here, and the point I try to make to try to say, well, you're anti-Semitic or something. I'm like, well, we had a problem with the French, we had a problem with the Germans, we had a problem with the Russians, we have a problem with the Chinese. We had less of a problem with the Indians because they were halfway there. We have a huge problem with the Muslims, and of course we have a problem with the Jews. What's the difference? Jews are here, and they excel at credentialism because credentialism is verbal, right? It's mostly verbal, so it sounds like you're smarter.
Oh my! I like that a lot. That was very rude. It sounds like it.
Well, it's like I have
this is when you hear verbalisms like it's settled science. It's like it means you don't want to have an argument with someone who knows the facts. And I want to tie this back because it goes to the obviousness of the expression of authority by the credentialed as an expression of inverse trust. As an individual, I'm not trustworthy, but I have the credential, so therefore you must trust me.
Well, it's more that there's no trust between the people and the government, and likewise, there's no trust between the government and the people. So when the feminine mind hears pandering by the government, in other words, someone like Barack Obama, who's chief panderer, right, did absolutely nothing good while he was in office, or this clown we have, who was just master panderer that forgot his last pander, right? I mean, he can't even remember it, right? So this feels good to the feminine mind and the left empathic mind, but it's actually catastrophic. The fact that they're pandering, they're storytelling, right? What happened in that you're referring to, and I'm not into this whole conspiracy about the COVID, even though I know there was a conspiracy against the economy and Trump, whatever. I just think people are stupid and ignorant about medicine, right? I mean, about biology, or especially viruses. And so I said, well, I can read these. I'm not a specialist, but I can read the studies and I know the difference between a good study and a bad, and how a conclusion can be drawn from a fact and a set of facts, experiments, and how one has to be imagined or projected or invented. Right. And so it was pretty obvious to me that this was going on, but the government pandered to people. The government should have told the truth to people. We don't fucking know. This is why we're doing this.
Yeah,
But
but my impression is they sought advantage to
right.
take
But
authority.
what do credentialed elites
Oh,
who have no experience really managing people do? They pander because they believe they're right and they believe they're better. One of the things you get out of managing large numbers of people in the military or industry is you are keenly aware of the spectrum of people, right? And what it really takes to manage them. And the answer is always the same: truth. There's no other answer. And so the minute you get into politics, you've lost statesmen. The minute you get into propagandists, you've lost intellectual. The minute you get into credentialism, which is a faith that you're right, versus demonstrated competency, which is empirical evidence that you're right. These two things happen. And so we have an elite class, an overproduction of what we call elite. They're not elites, actually. They're just credentialists.
wait. We had this in. They fall into the spectrum of the authoritarian credentialists, which is elite politicians, elites, credentialists.
Yes.
So they fall in there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This story I just told, right?
Yes, very good story.
It's very important. It tells why we're here.
Wait, why we're here? Why we're at
in
this
condition.
juncture?
Yeah.
This crisis.
Okay. Now, bad ideas need a market.
Yes.
Now I get to have some fun.
Uh-oh.
I get to have fun.
Put your seatbelts on, kids, because
it's not going to be that much fun because it's going to be the same thing as always. But I get to have a little fun. So, what is the market for false promise of the end of scarcity, the end of self-interest, and the end of evolutionary selection?
Utopian nonsense.
Right. That's utopian. That's they're all right. And let's add postmodernism, and that there is only relativism. There's no truth. Right. That's what science consists of: 4 categories: before, during, after, and how we describe it. The system of measurement for it. Right.
Okay.
All right. So that's what science is. Science consists of 4 logics: the before, during, and after logic. Right. And the 5th logic, which is logic itself, to use to describe more what we call language, computation, calculation. So, what am I doing?
Pseudoscience, science.
So, right. So the problem is that who's the ready market? Well, what you do is you tell people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, or below halfway through the pyramid, or in the case of women, who think they're terribly oppressed, even though they're horribly privileged, and say, how do you get that? What do you tell them? Well, you tell them they're oppressed, and that there is no scarcity, physical law. There is no universal demonstrated self-interest, regardless of context, and there is no evolutionary consequence. All right, and that that there is no such thing as truth. It's only what's true for you. I mean, you just violated the 4 laws of nature. Who wants to believe that? Well, who occupies the majority of the academy today? It's women.
That's it.
Who buys the most goods? It's women. Who listens to the most advertising? It's women. Who spends most of family income? Women. Right? But who consumes almost all of government services? Women. And so the problem you have here, right, which is that you hear things like, well, liberals are smarter. Well, what they're doing is they're counting degrees.
Yes.
Except that almost all degrees dominated by women aren't degrees in anything. They're nonsense. Right? If it's not a STEM degree, it's not a degree. It's an indoctrinate. It's an excuse. It's a high paid ticket to employment in a white collar job. Right? That's what it is. It's the equivalent of a medieval church
It's an indulgence.
indulgence, forgiveness of sins. So you're forgiven if you buy a college education like you buy an indulgence, you're forgiven your
Your lack of competency.
your lack of competency, and so you're given a permission to a white collar job, and through that white collar job you have the belief in your primacy. Well, the truth
Yeah,
is,
and you that's part of your indulgence.
it's part of your indulgence, and so it's like you've been washed of your class status. And so,
Yes.
so whereas STEM courses is the only measure of whether you have a brain in your head or not. If economics is the law chain, which is philosophy and law, is some philosophy or logic and law is somehow left out of the STEM. I usually do STEM plus L when I write it out. STEM plus L. And
L, logic.
L law.
Oh, okay.
Right. But even law is mostly memory. It's not
Yes.
calculation. And law is very open to pilpul and sophistry, and what we call constructivist law. Yes, we have social construction, right? But there's a thing in law called a construction, which is a story.
Yes.
All right, so law is very vulnerable to storytelling, which is why certain people excel in legal discipline, because it's very good. That's what John Adams said. This is the person who tells the best story wins the court case.
Yes.
So in any event, I was trying to wrap up there.
I think you did.
So, yeah, I said, so we're here, and the end result is that this convergence of three interests, which is the academy, the credentialism, the academy taking over from the church as the origin of moral license, the introgression of Marxism and technocracy from the socialists and communists, the introgression of Jewish post-war intellectuals bringing into us instead of external to us the Jewish method of pseudoscience, and the post-war demand for credentialed people to staff the science and technology that would be necessary for us to produce the economy that defeated the communists. And lastly, the dimension is the availability of a large number of easily indoctrinated females who are predisposed to magical thinking and empathy over systematizing. And so if you do that, what happened is we transferred a meritocratic, aristocratic government, right, to a credentialed, I don't know what class
Authoritarian.
authoritarian government. And so the purpose of the aristocracy and the common law and the military was to prevent the rise of authority, thereby preserving individual sovereignty, which then demanded from us maximization of responsibility. They are taking away responsibility, maximizing irresponsibility, maximizing credentialism, maximizing authority, to maximize the capacity to deny the laws of nature that the Western civilization evolved. In other words, to adapt to. So
I would say also collapsing the trifunctional nature of Western civilization, diminishing our capacity for cooperation at scale.
that's actually true. They're generating demand for authority by claiming oppression. No need for authority to manage oppression when it's not oppression, it's demand for responsibility in order to preserve the production of commons that are made possible by our adherence to natural law. right? So I just assume these people are too stupid to figure that out.
I presume that that's an error.
That I'm wrong.
I presume that you're underestimating their capacities, sir.
Yeah, well,
Because the ones that are of interest, and it's like a hierarchy of malicious behaviors.
right,
And
but I
it's
mean,
like,
if you go back in Jewish history, they've been talking forever about replacing their goal is to destroy European aristocracy so they can replace it with a credentialed authority. And they think that's going to be better.
well, they get
But,
to think whatever
but they
they
don't, do
choose.
they really know it's not going to be better? What people on earth, whether it's Muslims or Chinese or Russian, I mean, what people doesn't think that their way is best?
Everybody believes that.
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, we're all, everybody's a fucking idiot. They're just right.
They're just
Right.
bots.
They're just bots. And
But
so
they
you're the one who got me over my anger. And now
No.
I got to reverse roles here. I'm like trying to
No,
figure
it's kind
this
of
out.
entertaining, isn't it?
Between you and Martin, you know, I have like this daily fight now.
It's all good, Kurt. Like I say, just
I'm
you
not
watch the
against
show.
anybody. I'm against bad fucking ideas. And there are a
What's
lot
that?
of them to be against.
I know.
Right.
So we just leave it as it is. It's okay. We prosecute later.
Well, I mean, it's like I said, when I say this all the time, when I was in Ukraine, I said, and yeah, if I said this today, I wonder what happened. I said, if I said what in America, what I said in Ukraine, I'd get in trouble for it. I mean, I felt freer in Ukraine than I do here. And I said, the problem was you didn't hang any of them. And the problem is that's the reason you prosecute.
I understand.
Right? It's not them, it's prevention.
It's for the future, right?
It's for the future. The reason you hang people is prevention.
This goes to the inverse of Clausewitz.
Yes.
Which is Clausewitz's equation was war is politics by other means. Whereas we are at this point, which is inverse Clausewitz, which is politics is war by other means, which is the civil means of warfare. That's how we solve our differences in a civil fashion, which comes after we stop settling by other means.
Right. Well, what's economics is the same the next step.
Right. Economics is more civil.
Right. And what's intellectual? What's thought? That's more civil. Right. So I mean, just
layers of refinement of conflict. Right.
Yeah. The great thing is that the externalities start accumulating really positively.
That's right.
Right.
The less negative we are, right, which is the refinement is decreasing negativity.
Right. So I mean, when a war is a war of defense against, in other words, when a war exists to produce reciprocity, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Because if you can't have reciprocity, you can only war. But once you've had a war to produce reciprocity, now you move up into politics. And once you move from politics, you can move from economics. And once you can move from economics, you can move to discovery, innovation, knowledge, understanding. That's right. And so all you're doing is consuming these positive returns. So people say, well, war is bad. Well, not really. Wars can be bad. It's like violence is bad. That's not really true. Violence is just a resource that you can apply to moral and immoral means. War is just a resource you can apply to moral or immoral means. Right?
There you have it.
Politics is a resource you can apply to moral or immoral means. Economics is a resource that you can apply to moral or immoral means. Ideas are a resource that you can apply to moral and immoral means. They're just resources. They're not intrinsically anything, right? They're just things, right? They're completely neutral. We normatively consider war bad, and ideas good or economics good, but that's that's a mistake.
That's just a preference or a bias.
A bias, you can put these things to good or bad ends. So we can war by ideas, economies, politics, and physical violence, or we can cooperate by war, politics, economies, and
This is good.
all right,
So
so we
that's
can.
like this is the Western civilization has been warred upon and has been thoroughly trounced at this point for the last 150 years, it appears.
Correct. So now I'm going to complete the cycle, which is if I say, well, what's the reason for a strong offense? A strong defense, rather, because it's a deterrent.
Yes.
So what's our problem?
No, we
We
failed.
haven't had the deterrent. And what's the reason we didn't have the deterrent? Because the masculine advances first into the universe, right? So the industrial, technological, the agrarian, commercial, transport, commercial, financial, scientific, technological, and medical revolutions happened in order for the same reason that war, politics, economics, and information, whereas they depend on the previous to get there. And so what happened is, of course, those were all male advances, and we didn't get women to be able to exercise their biases until fairly recently, until 50 years ago, 70 years, 80 years ago. So what happened is we brought a whole new class into the polity with completely opposite instincts, completely hostile instincts. The entire world order we built, or they were completely regressive to the world we built. And so you say, well, what happened? Well, how do you know to defend against something you don't know?
It was unknown. It was unexpected.
Well, we had it in the common law, but we had believed our own bullshit from the Industrial Revolution. And we believed our own French bullshit that we got from the French about the nature of man. We believed all this positive bullshit. And the other side believed all the positive bullshit about oppression.
That's because we wanted to.
We want to believe the stuff, right? Because it's easy.
Just turns out that it's not right.
It's not right. So our problem is, of course, we let a hostile group, the Eastern European Jews largely, into the economy and polity with a credential elite that was superior under credentialism, even though they weren't superior under demonstrated competency. They can't produce a state, they never invent anything, right? So, they didn't produce anything of value until brought into our Aristotelian model world. And so once they did, they started to express their tendencies, just like how women brought into the economy and politics express their tendencies. This is what bots do, right? We don't have any choice. Mm-hmm. But we didn't keep up a good defense because we were living in our own belief, because that's what happened in Industrial Revolution. That, we've solved the problem.
We were lulled by
wealth.
Lullabies. Stories.
Wealth is a lullaby.
Yes.
And so, so the problem is we have allowed an introgression we've allowed an influx of 5 variables, 5 axes of causality into our system, and we haven't put a defense up against it. Well, our common law had a defense against it, but I'm not even sure. I can see it looking backward, but I see the problem, so I can look back and see it in the common law. Well, you got to take it. All right, we're going to pause.
Right.
So we've bribed the police that came by, so they're gone now.
Everybody's clear.
Is that what it is? No, he's just got a tradesman showing up, wanting to do some stuff for him. Anyway, and then so I was on a beautiful rant though about how we had an influx of 5 dimensions of, we had the Jewish intellectuals, credentialism, technocracy, the academy, whatever else. And then they found a ready market in the women, and the women, of course, go for gut courses, which are non-STEM courses. And these courses are basically built on pseudosciences. And of course, the pseudosciences all originated in the same Jewish intellectuals that I sort of cast through all the time, which is Marx, Freud, Boas, Lewontin, Gould, the Frankfurt School. I always love the influence of all these Jewish philosophers as if they're writing social science. They're not. They don't even have any background in social science. They're just writing wishes. Right. So even when we got to some of the Frankfurt School, like Adorno, those guys actually said, well, we're just making it up. It's not, it's a narrative, it's a story. But what is Abrahamic, the Middle Eastern tradition? Mythicism. What's mythicism? It's creating stories. And then they claim these fictions are true, right? Do they have?
Oh, and that's interesting. It's like, I don't know that they claim they're true, but they behave in a manner that is consistent with the premise that they're true.
Correct.
Which it's the same as believe in.
Right. So they live in a world of stories, and we live in a world of measurements. They live a world of positive ambitions, and we live in a world of the ambition is suppressing authority so that we maximize responsibility, maximizing individual opportunity, right? Self-determination. So we have the groups determined by the collective results of individual self-determination, and their world is built on the unification of the people into a polity that doesn't dissipate into the broader spectrum background of tribes by continuous reinforcement of the narrative and the social construction of that narrative. And so you see how we can't escape our cultural backgrounds any more than the Germans could escape philosophical rationalism, or the French could escape, which is really just the output of Protestantism, any more than the French could escape authoritarian Catholicism. Right?
I want to make an interjection, I think, because it's like this identity formations and stable identities. Specifically, I was interested in this Jewish identity, which is like, it's a weird, the term itself, Jewish, is very unusual, because it's like, it's descriptive. And it is like, there's a test, which is, do you believe the stories? Are you willing to play by the rules of the verbalisms that we play with our credentials? That makes you Jewish, like a Jew. Does that make sense? And it's like, so it is selection for people who follow with the credentialist plan.
Well, I mean, I think we've been over this, and I hear what you're saying, but my argument is, well, I'm a scientific Christian, right? But there are rational Christians, there are traditional Christians, there are spiritual Christians, and there are fundamentalist Christians. Fundamentally, we it's just the narrative we use to justify the underlying logic. And
right, go.
And some of us work in measurements, like me, and some of us work in parables, like fundamentalists. And so I mean, it's just and some people work in traditions, which is just habits, right? And you do these things because they maximize the opportunity for cooperation within the group. So I'm like, well, what's the difference between that and the Buddhist tradition or the Chinese tradition? Well, the Buddhist and the Hindu are kind of weird, but the Chinese is just like ours. There's no difference. There's Confucian, which is pretty rational, and there's Taoist, right? And then there's I did the wrong order. There's Taoist, there's Confucian, and then there's I can't remember I always get teased for not remembering his name, but the more analytic version of Chinese philosophy is a couple of guys. And I always use Sun Tzu as the proxy for that group because I can't remember the other guys' names. Right. So you have the military, the middle bureaucratic, and the peasantry, right? You have those three things in the civilization, just like you have the legal, the philosophical, the legal empirical, the philosophical, and the spiritual and Christian civilization. You have the same thing in the Reformed Jews, the observant Jews, and the fundamentalist Jews. You have the same thing there.
That's right.
I mean, I have a surprising number of, I have to do a study of this sometime because it's building right now. But I have a surprising number of Arabic people who write in Arabic or have Arabic language backgrounds, but they're educated, and I actually can't tell the difference between them and us. Right?
Right.
They're a little more. It's very hard because I can't tell the difference. They will say, well, in our culture we do this, but it's explained like that, right? So the same thing exists in the Islamic world. So all cultures have this.
That's right. That's right.
Spectrum.
So the issue in my mind is which one is being pandered to and promoted, and then
well, I mean, they pulled the female card. They know that Jewish culture is feminine. Is a female method of argument, female method of strategy, female method of warfare, and part of that warfare is hiding a hide plausible deniability by the claimant one is a victim. Now, they actually got legitimization of their victimhood with Hitler, so they're just using it to the maximization of their capacity. But why do we let them get away with it? Right. I mean, there's a difference between. Well, I mean, it's one thing to say we're not going to do that again because that was fucking awful, right? We don't want to do that again. It's another thing to say, well, you guys are communists and you invented it, right? We just right.
Hitler was a piker.
Well,
Hitler was a piker compared to the communists.
Yeah. So, and I said, but to claim that nationalism, ethnocentrism are goods is a contradiction in your own world. So what you're really doing is we're not letting you get away with it under the false pretense of there's an equality between the forced integration and forced extermination. I mean, there's no commonality there.
That's right. Those two Venn diagrams do not overlap.
They don't intersect. And the problem is you see this is I am really proud of my heritage. And I'm like, that's because you like a woman, you don't do any criticism because you're female, cognitively biased. You never tolerate self-criticism. Europeans do it all the time. And the second thing is that you have very selective memory. And so most Jews act as if, this is not me saying this is a quote, most Jews act as if their history begins in 1600. That's not true, right? I mean, there's a pretty horrific history of how bad the Jewish people are before that, which is what happens to them. And so I don't feel held accountable for Hitler's extermination, even though, and my understanding is they were trying to relocate originally, but then it became too costly, and so they became an extermination. I don't feel any more guilty about that than you appear to feel about all the horrors you inflicted upon Europeans in the previous 1,000 years before 1600, and all the horrors you've inflicted on us through your ideas since 1850, since we integrated you. So I mean, I don't feel bad about that. So why should I? The problem is you're not self-reflective and reforming. Well, the problem for Europeans is we had to be self-reflective and reforming. Was it easy for us? No, but we did it anyway. We do it anyway. We say, I'm not going to do that again. The problem is we have this Christian utopianism combined with Arianism or responsibility. And so what we do as we try to believe that we can colonize or colonize doesn't mean take over. I mean, it means manage, right? Take over an administration or rule, right? Which is just manage, right? Of people who are from other traditions. And it turns out we can't.
That was an error.
We could barely integrate them. And we can barely integrate them for reasons that I've said, which is, it's very emotionally and psychologically costly to behave like a European. And an awful lot of people can't do it. Or enough of our own people can't do it. And other people seem to be far worse at doing it than we are, other than East Asians. But they don't want the responsibility, which is really weird. They don't have the heroism. Chinese, Japanese do, so it must be cultural.
Yes.
Nobody else has truth before face is a good, which we do all the time. We view it as, speaking up, telling the truth rather than going with the consensus is heroic. You're to be lauded. Nobody else does that.
Yes.
It's antisocial to do it in every other civilization. Ours is heroic. Anyway, so that was a good story. I felt like that was one of the better talks I've been able to get across in just over an hour.
That's right.
Because we just explained, really, we explained the whole story, which is
where we are now, right?
We're here for historical reasons. As you imagine that when Indo-Europeans spread across the Indo-European plain, right? Our ancestors probably are the ones, they certainly are, which caused the Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah, they did. They drove out the boat. People had to go somewhere else because it's like, these guys are bad. We have to go somewhere else. So we're going to shrink that place.
Cleared, right? We had the Mediterranean age, right? And we caused the whole fucking world to react to us. People don't think, well, all those religions are reactions to Greece, but they are. They don't think about the Abrahamic religions are a reaction to the mass, not only to Greece, but to the Roman conversion of Greek thought into institutions.
That's right.
Right. So there's a counter reaction there. We don't think about the Bronze Age expansion. Or we don't think about the agrarian expansion. Those are all disruptive, right? You imagine how disruptive the agrarian expansion was? Yeah. Well, right? That was fucking horrible, right? And then we had the Bronze Age expansion. Holy shit. And then you had the Indo-Europeans, which is the borderline Iron Age thing. And they come around and like, holy fuck, these motherfuckers have industrialized killing people on, global scales.
Yeah.
Right. They drove everybody to imitate them. And so these things rippled catastrophically across all systems. Well, why would we think the classical restoration, first in Italy and then in England, and exploding out of there with the sequence of empirical scientific and technological and medical revolutions? Why would we think that would be the same disruption? And all we're seeing is the same disruption. So what do you think? It goes nearest to France, right? Then it spreads into Germany. Germany is really running Eastern Europe at the time, and Russia is the opposing force out on the edge. Russia tries to modernize, but they're so far behind, right? Then the war goes really badly because they're trying to constrain Germany. Why? Because France destroyed Germany, and Germany's just trying to restore itself. Right, so France is the fucking enemy of Europe, again, right? Which turns Russia into the enemy of Europe, right? Where before the French did all this stuff, you had Latin Europe, German Europe, Slavic Europe, and Russian Europe all sort of heading in the right direction. But what did the French do? They created the stupidest fucking ideas in history, which sold really, really well, right, to the peasantry, which caused all this fucking destruction that we're still living in. Well, then what happens, of course, each of these people create their own revolutions. French moral, philosophical, German analytic, there's a difference between reasonable and rational. And then we have the Eastern Europeans never got there, and then the Russians had their sort of thing. Hard to say. Eastern Europeans and German were integrating so tightly that it's really the Eastern Europeans are part of the German, right? And then you have the Russian, and then the Jewish comes along, and we're living through the Jewish disruption, right? Because they're the ones who got integrated. They only got integrated in 1830 it started, and then so they expressed their ideas. So we're just living in the adoption and correction curve of the Jews, like we lived in the adoption. Of the Germans and the French.
You got to put the post-industrial feminization, the women introduction of the women into the West, is an additional revolutionary construction.
But how is that different from the problems were caused by the introduction of the middle class, then the introduction of the underclass, then the introduction of women, then the introduction of Jews, because that's actually the next one, and the introduction of women. I mean, it's just the same fucking process. It's the same.
Well, it is, but it comes down to it's like the waves are all crashing at the same time.
Oh yeah, the severity of this one, the severity
At the
of this one
moment.
at the moment is really bad. It's on the scale of Catholic Protestant, which is the same thing. So when you look at history as these cycles of propagation of
Right.
organizing strategies, right, or knowledge, whatever, it makes perfect sense that this is going on. And we're going to do the thing that's happening. Interesting is the internet did more in the past 20 years.
Wow.
Than all our work for the past 400. I mean, it's just amazing to me.
Organizing and synchronizing.
It's the people hate this, but it's thinking white. It's just like thinking empirically. I hate it. It's not like we're special. We just thought empirically first. We thought empirically.
We thought of it first, right? You only call it white. You only call it white because
we thought of it first.
Thought of it first.
Right. That's all.
It just works better than all the other ways.
And we know why. It's because it's the least variant from the laws of nature. Why? By fucking accident.
Oops.
By it's just a freaking accident. Why? Why did organized religion develop in the Middle East? And why did empirical reason develop in the steppe, or European steppe? Ukraine. Why did it develop in Ukraine? Well, turns out it's really logical. Their causal axis was a set of hunting grounds, right? And our causal axis was equally economic, which is the use of carts to be able to cross the Eurasian plain in order to feed more livestock, which was basically which was even wealthier than grain, right? I mean, it's even wealthier than grain production.
Right.
So it's really obvious, right? I mean, things make sense. Why do they farm rice everywhere that they can? Well, it's a shit job, 360-day-a-year job, backbreaking job. But it produces more calories than wheat does. It's not as harmful to you as wheat is. And you can feed more people, and you can also have, wherever it grows means there's plenty of full water supplies. So I mean, you have all these things going for you. And so what kind of people think of Confucianism versus what kind of people think of Abrahamism versus what kind of people think of empiricism? It's just whatever the fucking environment was at the time, whenever you had to scale the people.
So it's ecological psychology.
Yeah. Say that again.
It's ecological psychology.
Is that the right term? We call it group strategy, but yeah, group strategy produces a psychology, right? Produces a group strategy, which results in a normative
right.
exploration, which results in a psychology. Yeah.
Right, which is a sociology.
Right. And
it's ecological in nature.
And is expressed as philosophy and institutions and religions and all this other shit, right?
That's it.
It's just, now, what happens if you're in the Middle East and there's fucking crazy shits in the mountains that come down and try to kill you and eat you every so often?
Be a beta guy. Don't try to be the
alpha. It's just, yeah, exactly. Or either that, or you just keep your head down and run your farm and
that's
get
right.
on with life, because it's like whoever's going to conquer the city next, they'll do the same shit. They'll just tax us the same way, more or less. And
it'll be all right. The priest is going to cover for us. We'll just tell the priest will tell us what we need to do to stay in good graces with the alpha, so nobody gets pissed and takes my head off.
Yeah. Right. And the priest is like, oh, great, I got a middleman job here.
There you go.
I keep the population in check, and that way the I basically defend the population from the aristocracy, right? And
They're
the
interchangeable. Aristocracy, they're
and the
just
aristocracy is replaceable.
they're just the momentary
Yeah.
dick. I had to work at that joke in.
I mean,
It's
and these
important.
people are dicks. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's just not a. I mean, we tend to look at the map and say these people are from here, but it's really better if you look at you look at it over time as who's conquering who, and you just see boom, 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 boom.
It's rough. It's a rough neighborhood.
It's just it's like drug dealers in the ghetto.
That's
You know,
it.
it's all that's going on there. And of course, why would you seek stability and in community at the bottom if you can't trust the aristocracy? Versus if you can trust the bureaucracy, China, or you can trust the aristocracy, because that's all there is, right? Because your people are the aristocracy, and the people who are peasants and slaves, well, they're the people you conquered. So we can trust our aristocracy because they're us, right? I mean, so we started out with a sort of aristocracy and nobility, very subtly different terms, but you can trust your aristocracy and your nobility. For the public, again, aristocracy is a fact, and nobility is an assignment, right? And aristocracy doesn't require you be rich. It's basically you're taking responsibility, right? As long as you have property, you can be middle class aristocracy, right? I mean, as long as you can afford the heirs and the responsibilities. Anyway, we did a good job with this.
That was a good run.
That was a good talk.
I hope the audience finds it as useful as I think it was. I think it helps kind of modulate your thinking and help you in your writing work.
That's why I wanted to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
When you brought it up, I'm like, okay, I'm going to run with this because this is the story I have to tell. So let's see if I can do it off the top of my head, because
that was pretty good.
If I can do it off the top of my head, it'll sound natural when I write it.
That's right.
And so if you see it how I've got out there, the couple drafts I've got there, it's not as clear as that. I love that I've got it in different dimensions, right? Because that's the causal.
That's right. It points to, each one points to its own causal axis, right?
Right.
That's awesome.
So you have these waves. It's just a series of, technological explosion producing adoption waves as it moves through polities, and polities change and adapt, or in most cases rebel against and adapt only that which they wish, right? Because we all preserve our group strategies.
It's quite interesting to me to having been associated with this information closely for about a year and a half, a little bit more, and it's like but to realize to see to the depth of the impact of these things, and as they function in real world, it increases in depth and scope as I continue with the work.
Yes.
It's interesting because it's like, oh, that's doing that, and this is doing this other more subtle thing that I didn't see at depth. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
I talk about this as time, your ability to perceive time. I mean, causes in time. But the thing you get into, which you bring up all the time, is it turns out that what's causing this is describable as not so many factors. In other words, there are patterns that are identifiable underneath all this, that once you understand those patterns, you realize there's a limited number of those patterns, which is there's only so many means of cooperation, right? War, politics, economic, right? And shit just blows up through a system, and we just react like trees in the wind. I mean, it's just
little leaves. Like,
Yeah, just the, you know, and we always assume that so what I like is that it makes the universe understandable, right? And part of what you've done is, of course, by getting me over my anger, is it's a lot easier to be forgiving of people's,
yes,
right? Different from forgiving of people, a
yes.
person, but it doesn't improve. That's not really true. You know, committing atrocities, I just, you know,
That's unacceptable.
that's just, there's no, you don't need to understand, there's no reason. That's okay. But there's on the other hand, you listen to people and you're like, well, you're just wrong, right? And or you're misguided, or you're uninformed, or you're making an error, or, you know, I mean, and I find it's a lot easier unless the people are obstructing me, and then I'm still just as frustrated.
You know, I kind of look at it like this. It's like atrocities, the people who commit them are guilty.
Yes,
That's the Western way. We don't hold their descendants to be responsible.
right.
But the wavelength of the atrocities that have been conducted against the West, they're not as atrocious, but they're of lasting destruction.
Yes,
And it's like the one of the things that to me is the compound interest on the destruction of the commons. What is the value of that is missing because we have been looted?
right.
Is
Horrible.
beyond immense. It's irreparable, just like an atrocity.
Right.
But it's ongoing.
The question: what's the difference between what's been done to the West from within and what was done to them in the Holocaust? Time.
It's a time function, yes.
That's all. It's just as damaging, but it's just being done quickly or slowly. So I don't. I mean, that's it sounds awful, but it's just true. So it's like if I press against you, right? That's not going to hurt very much. But if I do it with a pointy object fast, it is. But you know, that's the difference, is just that we don't perceive it as a problem, because the frog boils. This is the problem with the female method of warfare. It's seditious from within. It's undermining, and so it's hard to defend against because they're always hiding behind plausible deniability. Oh, we're just women. We're just weak. Oh, we're Jews. We've been prosecuted. I mean, it's crap, right? You're either engaging in a crime or you're not. And if your crime is seditious, you can't claim. You know, it's like, this is the word I get frustrated. This is what the part that angers me, when you realize women's behavior is reducible to escape from responsibility, right? Which is temporal, which is escape from the intertemporal. They want to live in the temporal. They want to think in the temporal. They want to feel in the temporal, and they want to escape the intertemporal consequences. So they evade responsibility, and they evade responsibility for easy reasons, because they want to minimize conflict between internally, right, with them, and externally with others, and so they do for sympathizing. So it's all great, but I mean, that doesn't mean they're not destructive with it. Just the same way a child is just ignorant and can be disruptive. Well, you have to defend against women's intuition the same way you have to defend against a child's.
Right. So failure to do so is itself a negligence of a
So those
sort.
of us who are capable of systematizing, are capable of knowledge, are capable of intertemporal, therefore capable of responsibility. We are de facto, willing or not, we must be responsible for those who are not responsible. And so once you see that irresponsibility as the factor, it becomes really obvious what's going on. And now it's like all you have to look for is what is this person trying to be irresponsible for? Keep asking yourself that question. You go through this is how I do it. What are you irresponsible for? What are the lists of demonstrated interests? You're going to find out what they're responsible for. I mean, it's just because that's all their brain's doing. I don't want to do any of this. I just want to consume at the least amount of responsibility. It's coming out in the manosphere, even in the feminists, or coming acutely aware of the fact that women avoid responsibility at all times, women project at all times, which is evasion of responsibility.
Right.
They and both of those are due to empathy for themselves and others instead of systematizing, which is also. And so you see this happening, but you don't see acknowledgement. They're not applying it outside of the relationship sphere yet. In other words, it's become, women view it as, well, I just want, but they're trying to avoid responsibility, but they're not taking that and scaling it up to, how are you demonstrating this outside of the field?
Outside of the field of interpersonal relationships.
Right. How are you demonstrating this evasion of responsibility elsewhere?
And social and political.
Economic and political, yeah. I'm trying to distinguish, by the way, between public, which is observable, and social, which is interaction.
Okay.
Political, which is the application of organized force. I'm trying to distinguish between public and I'm trying to disambiguate public and social, because I can be out in public and not, and I have only via negative constraints, right? I mean, but if I'm in social, I might have via positive constraints as well.
So well, what is this? To make the distinction clear for the audience.
Interpersonal, social, public, political.
Social will be like when I go to dinner at my friend's house. Right.
Or I'm hanging out in a group of people. We're actually.
And I have no public office.
Right. And
so public is.
I'm walking down the street and. Right. I'm just walking down the street. That's public.
Public is in the commons.
In the commons, right? Versus
social
may not be. Right. It may be. It's sort of like the public is the commons. The social is the semi-private.
Yes.
Right. And I keep doing that.
So public, then political.
Right. I think it should be public.
Economic and political.
Economic and political.
Okay, that's a good series of human interactions.
Yeah, I just felt that was necessary because I kept running this problem of talking about what behavior is allowable in different circumstances. And I was doing this because of race differences. So it's like in public, you have to be white. But in social, you don't have to be. Matter of fact, it's better not to be.
Be yourself.
Because
unrestrained.
Among your people, right? Because I mean, if you want
local norms prevail.
In public is norms for the group, right? For the all, right? Which is high trust.
So higher concurrency.
So you have to suppress more. You have to suppress more expression in public. And then when you're in social force, it's like I'm doing this because I'm doing the study of how Black and Hispanic groups work when they're separate from white groups.
How?
We have so much video now; it's really easy, right? I mean, I have to put on 6 videos, right? I just open up 6 fucking things, shrink them up, and watch them, and I just sit there and I just make notes while 6 of them go on, and the behavior is very consistent. And it's just the amount of impulse that has to be exercised in order to feel stable. And so you get it turns out to be neotenic, right? Just what you'd expect is Blacks are most. And then that even a black-white personality differences are very subtle, but it's an extroversion. They have to emote more. Right? So, but subtle differences expressed at large scale show up as large differences, right? So you watch, and I just watch black people together on their own. They're fucking awesome. But you can't ask them to be stoic, because every time we look at them in their social environment versus our social environment, they look barbaric to us, but they're not barbaric to each other. It's just free expression, right? It's part of their catharsis. And so Hispanics are sort of in the middle, right? They're a little more, yeah. And it's like, when you realize what I get, of course, like I've been saying this for years, like black people need God, Jesus. They just do, right? It might be that a lot of people need Jesus, but
Yeah.
a whole lot of people need Jesus.
I'm just listening to. I'm listening with the ears of a Christian to see what I wonder what kind of resonance that will afford in our audience.
Well, I mean, it's just I just have to. As if I'm going to a scientist testifying, I understand what Christianity does. I understand what the archetypal character of Jesus does. I understand this effect on the neural economy. And like, if Jesus is a good fucking idea. I mean, it just is, just sorry.
I just wonder about the expletive in the middle of that sentence.
Well, to me, I know what my equivalent is. It's Odin at small scale and Deus Pater at large scale. In other words, it's very Germanic. That's in my mind. So when I see God, right, in my mind, it's not Hebrew God. I think that God's disgusting, right? But so when I have my God, it's still the same. It's just a different character, right? So you have these these faces of the God, if there is a God, there's faces of God or gods, right? And so, I have a very dramatic one, quite just because of my background, right? But when you realize what the little people need, and I'm saying this is, I've had my aristocracy rubbed in my face repeatedly over the past 2 weeks for some reason. I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm like, well, the noblesse oblige, right? I mean, the little people need Jesus, and you know what? Jesus is good for them, and it makes them happy because it gives them a means of doing and feeling and whatever. I mean, I don't know what's the difference between me thinking of what would Aristotle do, and what we're, I'm sort of being funny here.
No difference.
It's no different at all. Right?
So what brings mental comfort despite adversity?
Yeah,
what allows you to continue to carry the burden that is yours,
right
alone?
So we have this term called closure in psychology.
Okay.
And closure means I can stop worrying about this, or the problem is solved, or whatever. But Jesus provides infinite closure to the stresses
Right.
of life.
Unlimited closure. Yeah.
Unlimited. It's just because what does he promise you? Unlimited love. Jesus loves you. I know. It fucking makes me feel it, and I'm like, I'm not a very. It works for me if I say that. Of course, I talk to God every day. I do. A lot of it's, what are you trying to get me? Can you give me a hand here? But I have a high agency. But if you're a person and you've got you're especially in the bottom 2/3 of humanity, and you don't have all the advantages and successes and rewards and relationships and all this other stuff that mean that you're continually running into positive affirmations from the real world. If you're right, if you're not running into continuous positive affirmations from the real world, Jesus is saying there, I love you, and your strength overcoming these is, and I'm like, it's just fucking genius. You know, and if you got to tell all those crazy stories to make it work, I'm fine with it. Right? Just don't argue with me about it. Maybe don't confuse Jesus's love and faith with the empirical science, because as far as I know, as long as you don't do that, they're compatible, because Jesus is telling you the truth.
There you go. And
Yeah.
science is attempting to represent the truth as well.
So I'm like,
They're not incompatible. They're
I-
necessarily compatible.
I have this horrible model in my head that God doesn't give a shit about us.
Right?
The laws of nature suck. And Jesus is the guy got sent to tell us, okay, guys, here's how you put up with it.
Here's how you deal with it, because it's not any make it any easier.
I was like, Aristotle's like, well, here's what it is. Well, I say
Right.
Aristotle. I mean, the Greeks are like, well, here's what the laws of the universe are. We just got to deal with them. And then Jesus comes along with it. You know what? These fucking Greek guys, turns out the universe actually doesn't give a shit about us. So Jesus comes along and says, I'm going to give you, well, it's true. It's just true. So when people say you're not a Christian, well, I'm not a fundamentalist. It's like, I'm not a fundamentalist.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with you.
Right. And I'm like, well, do you believe in
It's
this?
like fundamentally you are, because it's like, well, Jesus was right.
Yes.
That's the fundamental truth. And it's like everything else is a story about it. It's like, okay, it's not as important as the truth itself.
Right. So, but I also have a pantheon, because if your range of agency is very narrow or very limited, and
Yeah.
you're not getting positive affirmations from the world as you walk through it, or that's probably the wrong way to do it. Is that it's easier for you to overreach into things that provide conflicts in the world, right? And this is because of the people around you, your economic circumstances, your whatever.
You're scrapping over limited resources.
And so this may not be anybody's ill intent or your failure. It just means that there's very little that can work, right? So that stuff works. But if the more you move up to where you have agency, to like guys like us, it's like, well, I don't. Well, what's my limit? I'm not 6 feet tall, so I can't run a Fortune 500 company. There's my limit. I probably can't be a politician.
It's like it's opportunities, right? It's what is limited.
Right. But the field of opportunity is huge.
It's quite large.
It's like, okay, well, if I want to be a doctor, I'd be a doctor. You became a doctor, right? If I want to be an engineer,
anybody could do it.
It's just like, what do I want to spend the next couple of years on?
That's it.
That's it. Just there's no other harder decision than what would I prefer to be.
That's right. This is what my attitude was before I went to medical school. It's like, look, in 4 years, you're going to be 4 years older. And what else?
Yes.
And that's it. So that's it.
Well, and arguably the present conditions set aside, medical doctor is actually the most valuable profession, because there's no way that value is ever going to disappear.
That's right.
Right. There's just no other. I mean, lawyers are like a dime a dozen now, right? I mean, they can't. I mean, I know lawyers are making 60 grand a year now, right? I mean, it's just they're glorified paper shufflers, right? So it is embarrassing, really. There's a lot of people in law who shouldn't be. I don't know if that's true in doctors, but
what they're doing is politicizing it by promoting people that are not otherwise fit for the task for credentialing purposes, for the purpose of generating vested interests that are loyal.
Yeah. Okay, so I was trying to make a point there. Lots of
What are you going to do in 4 years, right?
Well, I was just saying that I got it. Thank you. So for some of us, like I would say, I could be a very good mathematician not a great one, but a good one. If I wanted to spend 6 years on math, because I'd have to spend
Yes,
6 years to train myself in the math at that level.
right.
And I'd be really interested in working on why string theory is close, because I know it's wrong. We know it's wrong, but why is it close? I'd like to actually explain that, because I think I know some of the answer. At least I know the direction of the answer, right? I mean, so I'd like to work in physics and physical mathematics, because I'd like to see this problem solved. But that would take me 10 years.
Right.
I don't have 10 years. When I was
Right
young,
now it's resource allocation,
right,
right?
it's just can't spend the time. Can I solve the problem of religion? Like you and I want to do this, and every day I'm like, even like I had a profound insight yesterday. I'm like, shit, this is easier than I thought. Right. So we can solve the problem of religion. It's getting to be where I'm like, well, it's not even hard. It's hard to institutionalize, but putting it out there is, oh my God, not even too hard. So I don't need to I just need to finish this job, this project, before we do that one. So, I mean,
I'm here.
Right, but that's not true of everyone. So your need for neural economy, in other words, relief of stress
Yep.
from the narrowness of opportunities you can calculate, pursue, and achieve positive feedback from, right, is dependent upon your agency. Right, is an agency is there's internal agency and external agency.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yes. Go ahead.
So people need a spectrum. So you would expect a spectrum to develop. Even in Christianity, the sects basically respond to the Christian sects basically
You dirty-minded people
Sects.
watching this.
No, I just
I
get
will spell it out.
somebody invariably says something. The Christian sex turns out to be really good, right? I mean, I get that. You wouldn't believe how often I hear that. Some variation on Christians have more sex. What are you talking about, Christian sex? No, sex. It's true. Christians have better sex, which is really weird. So Christians have better lives in general. I mean, really, honestly, but this is way too much for me. But anyway, so the Christian sects are basically IQ measures. And so why wouldn't we expect, if there's Christian sects have IQ measures, why wouldn't we expect IQ and personality traits to determine the spectrum? In other words, there would be people like me who are, basically scientists, and there are people who are that are fundamentalists.
That's right.
And there are people who need to so much construction around them.
We call them prisoners.
Well, I mean, do you pick on? I don't want to pick on any group, right?
No.
There are some groups that have so many laws because everything they do in life gets falsified.
Yes.
So they build Christianity around them, these really rigorous doctrines, because what they're doing is creating continuous self-reinforcement of positive feedback loops. I'm like, okay, as long as that doesn't turn into policy and law and argument about what's true, that's fine.
At least not where I choose to live.
I've had there were a lot of fundamentalists in the Northeast when I first moved there. Because it was a much smaller population. Now today it's another urban center, but and you would run into them all the time. And it's not like there's something sweet about Southern people that isn't true. Oh, I never thought that before, but that hurts and it's true. It's not true. It's very true. But they weren't very nice. They were like the weird kind, right? The weird kind, like we need our own little bubble and we're one step closer to a cult, versus, evangelical Protestants, they're their own little happy young Christian mobs,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's very positive. So where am I going with this? I don't know. It's just that I was studying the Hispanic and Black communities, and there's a difference between social and public. It's like public whiteness is required, but that doesn't mean social whiteness is required, because we're basically an army, right? We don't think of it that way, but the white folks are basically an army. We're organized like an army. We have duty like an army. We have ranks like an army, right? And the Germans, of course, the core of that thing, but the English are not that much different. And so we're an army, but they're not. And so our virtue signaling, our signaling, our positive signaling, consists of really signaling duty. Right? We're allowed all these ranges of creativity, but we're not allowed evasion of duty, which is responsibility. And it's just too hard for them because they're more emotional than we are. It's not like it's not like it's just a habit. Like well, we can see it in the data. Why? Because it's neotenic, right? And so of course Hispanics are all over the place, right? There's Hispanics that are 80% European.
Right.
There's Hispanics that are 10% European, right?
Right.
Place, but
Right. I'd say that within every racial category, if that's how you want to parse it out, there's going to be a spectrum along these lines.
correct.
And it's like, and then the size of your underclass will be related to the process by which you're gaining agency.
Yes.
Inversely proportional to agency is lower class.
Right. And so you might need to feel part of a herd. Like you're running with I mean, if you ever, I don't know if you're a runner. Do you ever run? But if you're
I have not been a runner much.
I have really bad asthma, but there are the times of life when I've worked hard enough at running that I can run. There's a really nice feeling of running together. There's an even better feeling of hunting together. Hunting with 10 guys is the highest spiritual feeling I've ever attained, because you feel absolutely invulnerable. I mean, there's 10 guys with high-powered rifles. I'm sure try to imagine what the Maasai warriors feel when they're marching, like 40 of them, right? Because they sort of jog.
Yeah.
And they move fast. I mean, you watch how they moving fast. Those guys, how spiritual that is. So there's a need for that kind of feeling in some people if they can't get it through other means. So that's a physical. Then you have it's a physical manifestation of group membership. Then there's there's the communal, which is the chitter chatter going around. You're just in this body of shit going on. It's like family. And then above that, there's this social environment. You're actually interacting with people and getting, right? So the problem is as these environments change in complexity. I mean, you get to the point where, it's like the financial sector. If you get to you can't see the average person can't interact with it. But if you know about people who move large amounts of money, it's like they have their own language, their own body language, their own manners, and it's absolutely blame-free speech. It's almost responsibility-free, but it's definitely blame-free. So all these words are very, very free of loading.
Okay.
And everything sounds very abstract. So if you get up to that level, your social is neutral. Interpersonal is neutral.
Yeah.
It's these protocols you're speaking in. It's the same thing in state departments, but I actually think the financial is more abstract than state departments.
Yes. Less responsible.
One of my friends sent me a video of his bosses talking financial stuff yesterday, that was about an hour long, and I just kept it running. And the guys are awesome at it. I mean, they're friendly, they're competent, they're verbally articulate, they know their subject matter. But if you understand the protocol, if you're watching the protocol, you realize that it's this incredibly value neutral.
That's right.
It's just talking about risk and reward and returns.
That's it.
And so the demands on the you have to be able to do that, right? You have to be able to get, and so there's this huge pyramid from the very tight brotherhood of warriors. It's called there's a term for it, the initiatic brotherhood of warriors, which is the tightest thing, up to the community or familial, the social, the small political, which is the next step up, the abstract economic, and then the financial. Right, this spectrum places more demands on the individual, right, to be more detached from his intuition.
That's right. That's right.
And so, and it requires you to adapt to these increasingly abstract frames. And so we see this not only in philosophies, religions, etc. We see it in what people choose to be educated in. We see this in what religion, what sect of what religion you belong to. We see it in what political bias you have. We see it. So this spectrum exists everywhere. And so the problem I see with today is that what most groups who integrate succeed at is they maintain what I call the cultural, social, and community, which means their festivals, their celebrations, their holidays, right? Some of their dress and their foods. It's mostly at this point foods, right? Foods and some holidays. And then integration is in what we call public. It's manners, ethics, morals, and norms, laws. And so what I feel like is, just as religion provides people some catharsis, defense, so does the community, the social and community aspect of their in-group. And so what I was trying to figure out is there a way to explain that to people, that you want to have your Black community, your Hispanic community, your Italian community, your Greek community, your Anglo-Saxon community.
So you're back to this kind of like the Roman Catholics had ethnic neighborhoods.
Yes.
Because those guys understand each other and know how to resonate well, and it's low stress. Everybody knows how to behave. Behavior is modified and modulated within those communities to everybody's behavioral economic benefit.
Right. Their emotional regulation is expressible in group, but not out group. Right there, or their lack of it.
Right.
Out group.
Their emotional catharsis is within acceptable bounds within the group.
Right, and it allows them the way out. Right. I mean, I think being white is hard. I mean, it's not.
I need a break. I want to go home and relax.
Right.
And stop inhibiting my behaviors.
Right. And that's what those groups are for. And so somebody sent me this link of this is a fascinating example of all these Maury Povich, John is XYZ is not the father episodes. Somebody
compiled. Oh my.
And like, what a beautiful piece of social science evidence. What's interesting is the Black men celebrate when they're not the father, and the white men cry. Isn't that fascinating?
Yep.
And there's not enough Hispanics in there. And of course, part of the problem is I mean, there's a bunch of, what is it? Bill Burr says, an epidemic of gold. What is it called? Gold digging whores, an epidemic of gold digging whores. Well, apparently that appears true because, but anyway, what I thought was really fascinating about this is how the Black community supports each other. There's all this emotion, and the white community does this or right, and the white guy cries, and there's so many of them. There's like, I mean, I don't know how many of these episodes there were, and there's more than 20, and there's like 10. That was hundreds, right? I mean, you know, if you have 1,000 of those, that's all there is. I mean, if you don't need any more, but it's once you get into hundreds, it becomes obvious. But you also saw how women magically think.
How is that? That's quite interesting.
Because they will believe what they want to believe.
Well, they'll behave in a manner that's consistent with their
Beliefs, yes. And it's another example of mothers of serial killers believe it didn't happen.
Oh my.
And the fathers are like, give me the fucking rope, I'll hang him myself. You know, it's just the same thing. Well, that's biology doing the work, right? What I love, that's what I love about this age, is it's one thing to read or study.
Oh, but to see the imagery of
when
it.
you have these videos, right? You have these incredible library of videos that, and especially if they're in a, see, I always say, you don't learn about anything about what people agree on. You learn what people fight about, right? That's how you learn about
differences, right? Well, it's
so
that demonstrated interest, right?
Yeah, because you're showing your instincts. An epidemic of gold digging whores. Anyway,
that man is funny.
The other thing you realize is how damaging the destruction of the family has been to the lower class compared to the upper classes, because I mean, they're already marginal.
Yes, there's no buffer has been destroyed. What little buffer there was,
right? And it's just cruel. And so then so now a guy whose only sense of self-worth can come from being a father and a husband, right? That's the only way he's got. It's all he's got going for him, right? Gets into a situation where he's married some fucking $2 whore, some bimbo, and she cheats on him or whatever. And this is really funny because the number of them that they're like, well, no, it turned that they have 4 kids, and he's not the father of any of them over the 6 years they've been married. I mean, she doesn't even know who the fathers of the other 4 are, and he has no idea that this is going on. Why? Because he's out, making his.
He's working to hold it all together.
He's working at his minimum wage job or minimum wage +2 job because it's the only thing he can do right in life. Right? He can feel good about, I've got responsibility. He's got kids. Kids love you, If you're a dad and that's your thing, right? This is important insight. If you're a dad and you're in that lower classes, if your kids love you, it's the only place you're getting it.
Yep.
And so to those guys, it's really profound. Then you go find out that none of these kids you love are yours, that your wife, that the one thing men value most in women is loyalty, which is what drives all male dating behavior. It's basically our shit test is loyalty, right? And then this ends up in kids, and the kids, and this gold digging whore is just interested in getting the money from him, and now she's got to go try to pursue 30 guys to figure out which are the fathers of her 4 kids, because none of them are her husbands, because she's a fucking whore. All right, seeking validation. Isn't that a nice term, validation?
She wants to get the ticket punched.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a really interesting thing. So the whole point of my conversation here is that we see this spectrum of needs in every group, in every dimension of every group, and that whiteness is very difficult, but there might be a way of looking at whiteness, religion, and future religions, and there's a way of compensating for it, right? It's possible to produce social structures that allow people to obtain mindfulness by by emotional expression, one way or another. It's like, why does Pentecostalism going like crazy in Africa? I mean, it's one thing to watch Pentecostals here, but if you go to you watch the videos of Pentecostals in Africa, geez, damn, do they have Jesus in them? They do talking in tongues or whatever. How different is that from African traditional religion? It's not.
Right.
It's a formal structure that legitimizes it. So you see these people, and they're like, it's the same thing with Black communities singing, you know, in church and shit, like prayer, praise the Lord, whatever. That's fucking stuff. They need it. I mean, for me, I need like soldier, I need the sort of ordered commands and the simultaneous motion. That's what, or the football team. I mean, that's what I need, because that's how I'm wired. But that's not.
And I know I'm doing it right.
Right. If I have that, I feel good. Right. There's nothing. I don't know how to like. And most guys will have a different way of X. They don't know how to put into words what they find that spiritual feeling in. But that spiritual feeling is what? What is this feeling we call spiritual? It's neural economy, because I feel safe in the tribe, in the pack. That's the expression of the internal trait, the safety in the tribe. That's what feeling spiritual means. That's why so many women who have high neuroticism and think of crazy shit all the time, like crystals and what is the thing where you have spots on your body, and the different places on your body have different auras and shit like that, and crazy shit, right? Yeah. This is all nonsense, but it's a way of letting their emotions out. In other words, of expressing and enjoying these emotions in some structured fashion that's under your control. You can invoke. Well, I mean, what does prayer do?
Right.
It was the same for me. I mean, we're all trying to get to this neural economy state, which means I feel safe in the tribe, which is governed pretty heavily by a bunch of factors, primarily neuroticism. Right? If you're highly neurotic, right? But neuroticism is just your sensitivity, while the amount of which your success and failure in daily life is amplified by your sensitivity or suppressed by your sensitivity. So, anyway, so I was trying to get that across as what I had been, that insight I'd been working on the past couple of days, a couple of running threads in my head the past couple of days. That's one of them. How do you solve this problem of whiteness being so fucking hard? Well, you limit to where it has to be expressed. You limit it to public. You limit it to public and public, economic, and political. Well, I mean, public and economic and political is a hierarchy, right? It takes effort to move from public influence, which you just have to be able to walk in public, to economic influence, where you have to have assets to negotiate and responsibility to negotiate them, and political, where you have to have groups which you are responsible for negotiating on the behalf of. So, I mean, most people need to largely express whiteness in public, even if they don't in social or interpersonal, private, social and private circumstances. And we should focus more on restoring institutions, which is why we have people think there's some high and mighty reason behind it, our freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is the reason, is what you described earlier. Is, well, you have the Italian community and the Greek, all these ethnicities have their own Catholic Church.
Their version of it, right?
right? Well, it's the Protestants did the same thing, especially once the agrarian revolution kicked off, and there was movement of people,
Right.
polities. So, by the 1790s, right, which is 80s, where this is becoming into question, this is a well understood problem, especially in the States where you have to create the United Church, right, which is what my grandparents founded. You create the United Church because nobody can afford to have a church for every little sect, right? But as soon as it was affordable, you got the Baptist Church and the Congregational Church and the whatever they are, as Episcopalian Church. All these churches sprung up in the 1800s when it was then affordable. So we have this. So that's the reason for freedom of religion. It's freedom of Christian religion to accommodate the different needs of the different peoples, because that's what churches did. They served a customer base. I feel like I've worn you out, or I've gone.
I don't know where you're going. I'm good. I think it's good. I think we're coming to a good closure point, actually.
If you didn't know where I was going, I was trying to deal with this problem of whiteness.
Yes.
Right. So I was trying to say, how do we handle the problem of the fact that whiteness is, in other words, I can't just say, I don't feel comfortable just saying to people, you have to think white. Well, I mean, you have to act white and think white in public, but that doesn't mean you have to feel white.
That's right.
There's a difference between white as science and white as natural law, and white as the European group evolutionary strategy of maximizing responsibility. Those are all necessary. But when you're in private, do you have to be a stoic like white people?
No.
No. Matter of fact, it's bad. If it's hard for you, it's not working. We need it to work so that you can do these things. Because being
That's
white,
right. You need, it's like so training the horses, it's the horse responds to pressure.
yes.
Okay. So what you do is you give him a little pressure when you want him to do something. When he performs, you release the pressure.
Pressure.
And then he can continue to go on his way, do it however he wants to.
Yes.
And when he needs correction, you give him a little more pressure, but you don't apply pressure all the time. It's rude.
Yes. And really how if your horse is, like my horse was a barrel race.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you could like move your ass cheek and he knew what that meant. Right. And of course I get on him and I'm like, he's like, what you don't know what the
He doesn't know what you're talking about.
Oh, no, he knows, but it's fine. He's like, you don't know what the fuck you're doing, do you?
He does. He knows. It's like, this is confusing mess going on up there.
But he was like, I'm not letting you fall off. That's his thing. I don't know why he was like that, but he's like, yeah, I'm not doing that because you're going to fall off.
That's stupid. No, we're not doing that. No, but the interesting function of it is it's like the judge that I work with, he's like, they're like 8th grade boys, the horses. They're going to test the limits. And so it's like, to me, that it's like you're working to understand how to communicate with them. And it's the same with the bringing people into the civilization. It's to give them a little pressure, to correct them where they're wrong, and leave them alone otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Just where it's necessary, you give them a little pressure. As little as possible, because it's expensive to apply the pressure.
Well, this is the interesting question, which is the consequence of what I just went through. Is that a truthful religion is possible for whom?
Right.
In other words, I won't go into it now because we're short on time, but I had an insight yesterday into how to improve. In other words, the training, the core training that has to happen is just one thing, right?
Okay.
Right. So the problem is, how many of us can be trained to do that thing? And
Right.
I think the answer is, how many of us can be trained to do that thing at what age with how much effort?
That's right.
And how many of us can never be trained to do that thing at any age, no matter how much effort?
That's it.
And so we have to, while it's possible to, so the hard part isn't coming up with a truthful religion. It's coming up with the narrative that will habituate the behavior, right?
Right.
That would result if you could do these things. So
Right.
that's the problem. It's enough stories. Basically, you need Aesop's fables,
Right.
for the true religion, because there's just some people that can't. They just simply can't do it. It's like, I keep complaining about. I'm really disheartened, depressed by my knowledge of just how quickly the logical facility declines in human beings under 100, or even under 105.
Mm-hmm.
It collapses really fast. We always think of it as, well, above 115, you can do a real college education. Above 125, you could probably do a STEM course, and above 145, you can probably begin to contributing to theory and get a PhD. Right? That's great, except that you're not saying the opposite, which is below 105, you lose this ability, below 95, you lose this ability, below 87, you lose this ability, and below 83, you lose this ability, and it gets worse. Right, and down to the 70s, you have no ability, almost no ability that isn't directly demonstrable by physical action.
Right.
Like pygmies get along fine, but if you look at their 55 IQ, I mean, but if you look at what they have to do, they can learn it all by imitation, and it's right. And the other thing is that they're not broken. So the problem with a European with a 55 IQ, something's wrong. There's nothing wrong with a person who is a 50 IQ who's pygmy. Does that make sense? It can't process abstractions, but there's no defect. But in order to produce an ethnic European with a 50 IQ, there has to be a defect. So you can't just compare IQ with as apples and apples. Anyway, okay, so I think you want me to wrap up by your body language.
Okay. That works. No, we've been going about 3 hours almost.
All right, so we got into, what was the first thing we talked about?
We talked about the British Prime Minister resigning.
Yep, and we went
Thomas Jefferson's error of the incorporation of French thought into America.
We used Liz Truss as a doorway into explaining why we are where we are, and that was a really good conversation.
Yes.
And then in the second part here, I've asked you, I'm going to try to let it into what I've been working on, which is how do we assist in the creation of tolerance for whiteness?
Right.
That was all, and that's all I remember talking about.
That's pretty good.
Right. I just want to know those things so I can put them in the description.
Very good.
All right, brother.
It's been wonderful, and I'll look forward to chatting with you tomorrow.
Do you have more topics for tomorrow? Is there more stuff we didn't get to?
I have. I wrote a bunch of stuff down because we still haven't even got to this. The big question that I want to talk about tomorrow is the failure of the right to coalesce and subframe addiction.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's one of them.
That'll be really interesting.
There's a couple other ones, and that's all very good.
All right, love you, brother. I'm going to go make some lunch.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you tomorrow, Kurt.